Have you ever felt like your life was over? Like the best years are behind you, and there's nothing left but quiet days, waiting for something that never seems to come. That's how Dorothy felt too. Until one day, everything changed. You see, Dorothy is a grandmother, a mother, a widow. At 68, she had lived a full life, but somewhere along the way, the laughter, the excitement, the love she once knew faded into the background. She thought her heart had dried up along with her wrinkles, that it was too late to feel alive again. But she was wrong. Something happened to Dorothy, something she never expected. It started with a pain in her back, a simple sciatica diagnosis, but it led her down a road she never imagined. It was a road that brought a kind of love she thought only the young could experience. The kind of love that makes your heart race, makes you feel seen, heard, alive again. If you've ever felt like it was too late for you, like maybe life has passed you by, stay tuned for Dorothy's incredible journey. You'll want to hear this, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to follow along. You never know. Maybe it's your turn to rediscover what you've been waiting for. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever felt like it was too late to start again? We want to hear your stories of rediscovery and love. Let's talk about it. Dorothy's life had become a quiet routine. Every morning she'd wake up to the same sound, the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, the sunlight peeking through the curtains just as it had for years. She would get up, shuffle to the kitchen, and prepare a pot of coffee, the smell of it filling the empty house. It was a house that used to be full of laughter, of love, of her husband, Charles, who had passed away nearly a decade ago. The house felt different now, quieter, lonelier. Dorothy missed the conversations, the warmth of another body next to hers, the presence of a life shared. Now it was just her and the echoes of the past, the silence weighing heavily on her heart. Every day felt the same, every room felt like a memory. She'd get dressed, usually in something comfortable, but unremarkable, a faded cardigan, simple slacks. There was no reason to dress up anymore, no one to impress. Her children, Robert, Christine, and Mark, lived in different parts of the city, all of them well-meaning but worried. They called, but only when they had to, and when they did, it was never about how she was really doing, but more about telling her what she should do. "Mom, you really shouldn't be going out alone," Robert would say. "You need to take your medicine on time, Mom," Christine would remind her. They meant well, of course. But lately, Dorothy had begun to feel like she was a child again, one that needed constant supervision. She could sense the change in the way they looked at her, more like a responsibility than a mother. They told her what to eat, what to wear, and when to rest. Sometimes she'd hear them talk about her health in hushed tones, as if she wasn't there. It was as if they'd forgotten who she truly was. Not just their mother, but a woman with her own wants, her own history, and her own desires. Dorothy had worked for 35 years as a secretary at Lincoln High School. Her hands had once signed countless report cards, detention slips, and approval forms. She had been a constant presence in that office, someone who held it all together. She was seen, heard, valued. But now, at 68, she was nothing more than a woman with aches in her back and a growing list of things she was no longer allowed to do on her own. And it wasn't just the physical pain, though the sciatica was becoming harder to ignore. It was the emotional ache of feeling forgotten. For so many years she had been Charles's wife, the mother of their children, a pillar in her community. But now those roles felt distant. Charles was gone. Her children were grown, and she didn't need to take care of them anymore. She didn't even need to take care of herself in the way she once had. But still, there was a part of her that longed for something more than just this routine. Something that felt like life, like it mattered. Sometimes, when she sat alone in the evenings, she would glance at the empty chair beside her at the kitchen table and think, was this all there was? The world was still turning outside her window, but inside, it felt as though time had stopped. Her children didn't seem to understand. They said they were helping her, that they were just looking out for her, but Dorothy knew. She knew she wasn't the woman they thought she was. There was still a spark in her, a flicker of something waiting to come alive again, even if she didn't know how to find it. She didn't want to be just a mother, just a grandmother, just a widow. She wanted to be Dorothy, the woman who had once danced through life, the woman who still had stories to tell, still had dreams to chase. But in the silence of the house, those dreams seemed so far away. And with each passing day, it felt like the distance between her and those dreams grew wider. Dorothy wasn't sure how it happened, but one Tuesday morning, just like any other, the doorbell rang. It was Robert, her son, who had arranged for a physical therapist to come to the house. He'd insisted, worried about her ongoing sciatica pain, and though she had resisted, "I don't need anyone coming over here," she had argued. It didn't take much to convince her. Robert's concern was enough to make her give in. When Dorothy opened the door, she wasn't prepared for what, or rather who, was standing there. "Mrs. Wilson?" The man's voice was deep, but gentle, with a warmth that immediately put her on edge. Dorothy looked up, startled by his youth. He couldn't have been more than 30-something, tall, with olive skin and a broad smile that seemed far too bright for someone coming to treat her. "I'm Ethan, the physical therapist. I've come to help with your back pain," he said, extending his hand with a professional but friendly air. Dorothy blinked. She wasn't used to people, especially young men, being so friendly, so open. She'd spent most of her days in the quiet company of her own thoughts, avoiding much contact with the outside world. Her first instinct was to pull back, to feel awkward. She had no idea why, but something about his easy smile and those kind eyes made her feel exposed. It wasn't just the fact that he was a stranger in her home. It was the fact that he saw her. Not the frail old woman who had trouble walking, not the widow whose life seemed to have stalled, but her. The real woman, the one buried beneath the years of grief and routine. "Please, come in," she said, stepping aside and giving him space to enter. Though the invitation felt foreign, strange. Ethan walked into the house with ease, surveying the cozy living room as if it were a place he belonged. Dorothy tried to ignore the tight feeling in her chest as she watched him. He wasn't like the people who had come to visit in the past. Doctor's appointments, social workers, the occasional neighbor who dropped by out of politeness. Ethan was different. He didn't look at her as though she was fragile, as though she needed to be handled with care. He didn't pity her. There was something about him, his energy, his confidence, that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "This is a nice home," he remarked, his voice warm and easy as he settled in. It wasn't the kind of compliment that was meant to be polite. It felt real, like he truly noticed the details. The picture frames on the shelf, the plants in the corners of the room, the small knickknacks that had accumulated over the years. Dorothy felt herself standing a little straighter, almost instinctively, as if he had seen something in her that she had forgotten was there. "Thank you," she murmured, shifting on her feet, unsure of what to say next. Ethan seemed to sense her discomfort. He smiled again, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and suddenly the room didn't feel so small. His presence was warm but not overwhelming, like the sun on a cold day. "Let's get started with your treatment," he said, his tone professional but laced with a kindness that felt strange. She had spent so many years in silence, in isolation, that someone speaking to her like this, like a real person, not an old woman, felt both unnerving and comforting at the same time. As he set up for the physical therapy session, Dorothy couldn't shake the feeling that there was something about him, Something about the way he moved, the way he looked at her, that stirred something deep inside her. She felt a flicker of curiosity, an unexpected spark. For a moment, she caught herself wondering, why do I feel this way? Why was she nervous? Why did her heart race when he looked at her with those kind eyes? It wasn't just the treatment. No, it was something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was the simple act of being seen again, of being treated with respect, of feeling like there was still life left in her. So, Mrs. Wilson, let's start with some simple stretches, Ethan said, and Dorothy realized in that moment that she had forgotten what it was like to have someone care enough to guide her, to help her. Have you ever met someone who made you feel alive again, even when you weren't looking for it? Share your stories with us in the comments below. Dorothy hadn't realized how much time had passed since the last time she felt truly seen. It wasn't just the aches in her back or the stiffness in her joints that had caused her to retreat from the world. It was something deeper. Something that lived in the quiet of her days, in the hollow spaces where love used to be. But Ethan had a way of making her feel like she was more than just a widow, more than just a woman whose best years were behind her. All right, Mrs. Wilson, let's begin with some stretching, he said, his voice calm and reassuring as he guided her to lie down on the mat. Dorothy felt her heart race a little, though she couldn't understand why. As Ethan positioned her legs, his hands brushed against her skin. It was just a simple touch, professional, steady, but there was something about it. Something that made Dorothy's breath catch in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt alive. Not because of the physical relief he was bringing her, but because of the way he looked at her, like she wasn't just a woman with aches and pains, but someone worthy of attention. His touch was firm but gentle as he worked through the tight muscles in her legs. Every movement was precise, yet there was a tenderness in the way he held her body, in the way he listened to her discomfort and adjusted accordingly. It was as if, with every press of his hands, she was not just being healed physically, but emotionally too. "That's it," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper as he pressed against a tension point. Dorothy let out a soft sigh, but it wasn't just the pain that made her react. It was something else. A stirring inside her, something she thought had disappeared long ago. For the first time since Charles had died, she realized that she was still here. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't just someone's mother, someone's widow. She was a woman, capable of feeling, capable of being touched, capable of being desired. "How does that feel?" Ethan asked, looking up at her with those warm eyes, his hands still resting on her legs. Dorothy blinked, a little flustered. She hadn't expected to feel this way, and she didn't know how to respond. "Was it okay to feel this way, after all these years?" "Better," she said, her voice a little shaky. "Much better." It was a small step, but a significant one. Every time Ethan came over, the pain in her back seemed to lessen, but so did the heaviness in her soul. She found herself looking forward to these sessions, not just for the physical relief, but for the connection, for the way she felt when he was in the room, seen, heard. For the first time in a long while, Dorothy began to feel attractive again. Over the next few weeks, things started to change. She began to notice herself in the mirror a little differently. No longer just the woman with the gray hair and tired eyes. No longer just the widow with the past that seemed to define her. She started to see the woman who had once been vibrant, lively. A woman who still had something to offer. Dorothy found herself taking more care in the way she looked. At first, it was just small things. A little more attention to her appearance, a better effort with her clothes. She bought a new blouse, something bright, something different. She hadn't bought anything new for herself in years, at least not since Charles had passed. She used to think there was no point, but now she felt like she deserved to enjoy the little things. One afternoon, after a particularly invigorating session with Ethan, she decided on a whim to go to the hair salon. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a simple trim, maybe a little more shape to it. But as she looked at herself in the salon mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She felt alive. Her hair, once tied up in a hasty bun every morning, now flowed freely around her shoulders. Her face looked brighter. For the first time in ages, Dorothy felt something, and it wasn't just relief from her sciatica. It was hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't done yet. When she returned home, she walked past the full-length mirror in the hallway, stopping to take a long look at herself. It was the same woman who had spent the last decade in mourning, in routine. But now something had changed. The woman in the mirror stood a little taller, with a hint of something new in her eyes, a spark that had been dimmed, but never gone out. And the more she looked, the more she realized, I deserve this. She deserved to feel good again, to care for herself, to find joy in the little things. Ethan had helped her remember that. Over the next few days, Dorothy took small steps. She started taking longer walks in the morning, something she hadn't done in years. She treated herself to a coffee at a cafe downtown, just to sit, to people watch, to be. She even bought a pair of shoes she had always wanted but never felt she deserved. It was like a whole new world was opening up to her, and she was taking her first steps into it, slowly but surely. It wasn't just about her appearance. It was about feeling alive again. It was about feeling worthwhile, and with every small change, Dorothy could feel herself coming back to life. Have you ever had a moment where you rediscovered yourself? A time when you realized you still had so much more to give? Share your story with us in the comments below. Dorothy's mornings had started to change. She no longer dragged herself out of bed just to go through the motions. Something inside her had shifted. The pain in her back was still there, but it wasn't the only thing she thought about anymore. Ethan had a way of making her feel like there was more to life than the ache in her joints. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she found herself looking forward to his visits, not just because they helped with the sciatica, but because Ethan's presence had become something she craved. He was more than just a physical therapist. He was the spark of life she had been missing. It wasn't just the therapy that kept her looking forward to his visits. Dorothy began to notice that she had started to do things for herself again. It started small, a bit of makeup, a careful selection of clothes that made her feel good. She even bought a new dress, a little brighter than she would have dared wear before. It wasn't the kind of thing she would have considered for herself in the past, but now, the idea of feeling good about how she looked didn't seem like such a foreign concept. She spent hours getting her nails done, something she hadn't treated herself to in years. She'd sit there, her hands in the soak, and think about the last time she had done something simply because it made her happy, not because she had to. Dorothy couldn't remember the last time she felt like this. She felt alive. She felt noticed. But as much as she loved the changes, as much as she reveled in the small acts of self-care, there was a part of her that couldn't help but feel guilty. Shouldn't I be past this? She thought. Shouldn't a woman my age be content with the life she's had, not searching for more? The guilt crept in whenever she noticed how much she looked forward to Ethan's visits. She would lie in bed at night, her thoughts swirling. What if I'm just fooling myself? What if I'm just looking for something to fill the emptiness? But the more she wrestled with those thoughts, the more she realized something she hadn't wanted to admit before. She wasn't looking for a distraction. She wasn't looking to escape her grief or loneliness. What she was looking for was something she hadn't realized she had lost. A sense of herself. A sense of aliveness. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session with Ethan, Dorothy stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her clothes and straightening her hair. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the weight of the years pressing down on her. She didn't feel like the widow who had buried her life along with her husband. She felt like Dorothy, the woman who had once had dreams, who had once danced and laughed and loved. Her reflection was no longer just a reminder of what had been lost. It was a reflection of who she could still be. In that moment, she realized something profound. Her desires were valid. It wasn't wrong to want more, to want to feel seen, to feel desired, even at 68. This wasn't about vanity. This wasn't about trying to relive her youth. This was about rediscovering herself. Dorothy smiled at her reflection. It was a small, quiet smile, but it meant everything. She wasn't just a mother. She wasn't just a widow. She was a woman. And that woman still had so much life left in her. She hadn't just found physical relief. She had found something far more important, a connection to herself, to her own heart. And now, every Tuesday when Ethan came over, it wasn't just about the exercises. It was about rediscovering a part of herself that she had long forgotten. The part that was still capable of feeling joy, of embracing life in all its fullness. If you think it's never too late to start living again, comment below. We want to hear your story. Dorothy's transformation didn't go unnoticed. At first, it was small things. Her daughter Christine noticed how she was dressing a little more stylishly, how she was wearing makeup again, even how her smile seemed a little more genuine. "Mom, you've been looking really good lately," Christine said one afternoon, her tone a mix of surprise and concern. "What's going on?" Dorothy paused, her hand still holding the cup of tea she'd been about to sip. She had known this was coming. They hadn't said anything yet, but she had felt the shift. The way her children began to look at her a little differently, like they were starting to see her, not just as their mother, but as something else. "I'm just feeling better. That's all," Dorothy said, giving a gentle shrug. But the truth was, she had more energy than she'd had in years. Ethan's physical therapy wasn't just helping her body. It was awakening a part of her that had been dormant for so long. Christine, however, didn't seem entirely convinced. "Is that it?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because, well, you've been spending a lot of time with Ethan." The mention of Ethan's name hit Dorothy like a cold breeze. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly regained her composure. "He's just my physical therapist," Dorothy replied, her voice firm but calm. But even as she said the words, she knew they didn't quite capture the reality of what Ethan had come to mean to her. He wasn't just helping her with her sciatica. He was helping her rediscover who she was. But Christine didn't let it go so easily. "I don't know, Mom. Something just seems off about this. You're a widow, for heaven's sake. He's young enough to be your son. Don't you think it's time to, I don't know, focus on other things? You shouldn't be worrying about that." Dorothy could feel her pulse quicken. Her daughter's words stung more than she expected. It was as if, in one breath, Christine had dismissed her right to feel anything, let alone have a life of her own. But Dorothy didn't back down. She wasn't a child anymore, and she wasn't about to let anyone treat her like one. "I'm not a child, Christine," Dorothy said, her voice steady, but tinged with the weight of years of silence. "I know what I'm doing, and I don't need your permission to live my life." Christine recoiled slightly, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I'm just looking out for you, Mom. You've been through so much. You don't need any more complications. You don't need him. You need us." Dorothy's heart ached at the words, but she didn't let it show. She had raised her children, done everything for them, and now they were telling her how to live her life. It was suffocating. They meant well, but they didn't understand. She had been the caregiver for so long. the one everyone turned to. But now it was her turn to be seen. "I appreciate your concern," Dorothy said, standing up, her voice soft but firm. "But this is about me. I need to do this for me." That night, as Dorothy lay in bed, she couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. Her children had always been there for her, but it seemed they were starting to see her less as the strong woman they'd once known, and more as someone they had to protect. Someone fragile, and that hurt more than anything. The days that followed were filled with more subtle remarks from her children. Concerned looks, careful words, and constant suggestions that maybe it was time for her to stop seeing Ethan. They didn't understand. And the more they tried to control her, the more she pushed back. It came to a head one afternoon when Robert, her eldest son, called. His voice, usually calm and measured, was sharp with concern. "Mom," he said, his tone heavier than usual, "I've been hearing things. From Christine, from Martha. People are worried about you. I think it's time to talk about what's really going on with Ethan." Dorothy's stomach twisted, but she kept her voice steady. "What's really going on with Ethan?" she repeated, though she already knew where this conversation was headed. "I don't think it's healthy for you to be spending so much time with him," Robert said, his words more pointed now. "You're just setting yourself up for disappointment. You've already been through enough. You don't need to start complicating things." Dorothy's heart pounded in her chest. She had heard these words from Christine, and now Robert was saying them too. But she wouldn't back down. "Not this time. I'm not a child, Robert," she said, her voice sharp with defiance. "I'm not going to sit around waiting for my life to pass by because you think I'm too old to want anything more. I'm still here, and I'm still living my life." Robert's silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Dorothy could almost hear the weight of his disappointment. "I'm not asking for your approval," she continued, her voice softer now, "but I'm asking you to respect my choices." It wasn't the conversation Dorothy had hoped for, but it was the one she needed. She was tired of living for others. She had spent too many years putting everyone else's needs above her own. Now it was her turn. If you think it's never too late to start living again, comment below. We want to hear your story. Dorothy's newfound energy didn't go unnoticed by her children. What had started as small, subtle changes, wearing brighter clothes, doing her hair, taking more care with her appearance, soon became more apparent. She started to enjoy life again, in ways she hadn't in years. And with each little step she took toward rediscovering herself, her children began to grow more concerned. One afternoon, Christine came by for a visit, her face serious as she sat down beside Dorothy on the couch. "Mom, you've been looking different lately," Christine said, her eyes scanning Dorothy as if trying to understand what had changed. Dorothy had been expecting this. Her daughter wasn't one to shy away from sharing her concerns. "What do you mean?" Dorothy asked, trying to keep her voice casual, though she could feel the tension building in her chest. "I mean, you're," smiling more, "you're going out more, and you're spending a lot of time with Ethan. Are you sure that's a good idea?" Christine's voice was laced with concern, but underneath it, there was a hint of something else, something more controlling. Dorothy froze. Ethan's name was the trigger. She hadn't expected the children to notice so quickly how much her relationship with him had shifted. It wasn't just about physical therapy anymore. It had become about something more. A sense of connection, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, she could still live. Really live. Again. "Ethan's been helping me with my back, Christine." "That's all," Dorothy said, though the words didn't feel like they fit the whole picture. They never would, not anymore. But Christine wasn't convinced. "Mom, I'm just worried. He's young enough to be your son, and you're spending all this time with him. Don't you think you should focus on something more appropriate? You're a widow. You shouldn't be thinking about a relationship right now. Dorothy felt her chest tighten. The words hit harder than she expected. You're a widow. She had heard them so many times, even from herself. But what did it really mean? Did it mean she was supposed to lock herself away from the world forever? Never to seek joy or companionship again? She wasn't ready to accept that. Christine, Dorothy said, her voice steady. I've lived a long life, and I've lived it for everyone else. My children, my husband. I gave everything I had to those roles. But I'm still here. I'm still me. And I'm not going to apologize for wanting to feel good, for wanting to live. Christine looked taken aback, but Dorothy didn't give her a chance to respond. She had been holding back for too long, letting her children tell her how to live, how to feel. It was time to take control of her own life again. You may not understand it, but I don't need permission from anyone to live my life, Dorothy continued, her voice firm, though a part of her was still trembling inside. She had never stood up to her children like this before. But something inside her told her it was necessary. That night, as Dorothy lay in bed, the weight of the conversation lingered. Her heart ached, not just from the emotional exhaustion, but from the conflicting emotions swirling inside her. She loved her children, but it was clear they didn't see her as the woman she was. They still saw her as the mother who needed to be protected, the widow who should never seek happiness again. Her children didn't understand the way she felt about Ethan. They didn't understand what it meant to feel alive again. But she wasn't sure how to explain it to them. How could she tell them that Ethan's presence had awakened something in her, something she thought was lost forever? The next day, Robert called. His voice was just as serious as Christine's had been. "Mom, I've been hearing a lot of talk," Robert said, his tone heavy with concern. "I don't want to see you get hurt. You don't need Ethan in your life right now. It's not good for you." Dorothy closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of guilt creeping in. Why does this feel like a betrayal? She wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't asking for permission to be happy. She was just living. "I'm not asking for your approval, Robert," Dorothy said, her voice quiet but strong. "I'm asking you to respect my choice. I'm not a child. I don't need to be protected, and I'm not going to stop living because it makes you uncomfortable." There was silence on the other end of the phone. Robert didn't respond right away, but Dorothy could hear the disappointment in his breath, the weight of his unspoken thoughts. "Mom, you've been through so much," he finally said, his voice softer now. "I just don't want to see you get hurt again. And I don't want to be treated like I'm fragile," Dorothy replied, a knot tightening in her stomach. "I'm still here. I'm still living. And I deserve to live the way I choose." The conversation ended with neither of them satisfied, but Dorothy felt a quiet sense of relief. She had made her choice. She had drawn a line in the sand. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Dorothy knew the road ahead would be full of difficult conversations, and her children might never understand. But one thing was clear. She wasn't going to let their disapproval stop her from finding joy in her own life. If you think it's never too late to start living again, comment below. We want to hear your story. As the weeks passed, Dorothy began to look forward to Ethan's visits with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. What had started as a professional relationship, rooted in physical therapy, had blossomed into something deeper, something more intimate than she ever expected. It wasn't just the way Ethan helped her with her sciatica, though that was a relief in itself. It was the way he listened, the way he looked at her, not just as a patient but as a person. He never treated her like someone to be pitied or handled delicately. Ethan saw her for who she was, A woman with a past, with dreams, with a life still full of possibilities. One evening, after a particularly intense session, they sat together in the living room, catching their breath. The air between them was filled with an unspoken understanding, a connection that felt both comforting and electric. Ethan was sitting across from her, his eyes thoughtful, his posture relaxed as he leaned back into the couch. "So," he said after a beat, "tell me about your life before all of this." Dorothy hesitated at first. She hadn't really talked much about her life before Charles had passed. So much of her identity had been wrapped up in her role as a wife, as a mother, that the woman she had been seemed distant, almost forgotten. But something about Ethan made her want to share. Maybe it was the way he listened, the way he didn't rush her, the way he respected her silence before gently nudging her to speak. "I used to love to dance," Dorothy began, her voice soft, but with a hint of nostalgia. "Charles didn't like it much. He thought it was frivolous. But I would sneak away to the dance hall once in a while with a girlfriend or two and just let myself go." Ethan's eyes softened as she spoke. "I can't picture you dancing," he said with a smile. "But I can imagine how free it must have felt." Dorothy's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't just humoring her. He was listening. For the first time in a long while, she felt like someone was seeing her for who she truly was, not just the woman she had become after decades of caregiving and sacrifice. "I was never the best dancer," Dorothy continued, her voice more at ease now. "But it didn't matter. I just loved how it made me feel alive, like I could breathe." Ethan nodded, as if he understood more than words could express. "You deserve to feel that again," he said quietly. The words lingered in the air, hanging between them. It was the first time anyone, other than herself, had told her that she deserved to feel alive, and it felt like a revelation. She hadn't realized just how much she had been denying herself, how much she had buried under the weight of her grief and responsibility. As their sessions continued, the connection between them deepened. Ethan began to share more about his own life. Little snippets of his past, the places he'd traveled, the people who had shaped him, his dreams for the future. He wasn't just the therapist who came to help her stretch and strengthen. He was a person too, with hopes and fears. One day, after another session where Dorothy felt her body growing stronger, she found herself sitting next to Ethan on the couch, her hand resting on the arm of the chair. Without thinking, she reached out, brushing her fingers gently against his. It was a simple gesture, almost accidental, but when her fingers touched his, she felt a spark of warmth travel through her. Ethan looked at her, his expression gentle but filled with something deeper, a recognition of the bond they had started to form. He didn't pull away. Instead, he allowed the silence to fill the space between them, their hands just barely touching. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Ethan said softly, his voice steady but kind. Dorothy didn't reply at first. She wasn't sure what to say. She hadn't expected to feel this, not this tenderness, not this quiet connection. It was as if, with every touch, every conversation, he was slowly helping her rediscover parts of herself she had long forgotten. For the first time in years, Dorothy felt seen, not just as a patient, but as a woman. A woman with desires, with a history, with a heart that still beat for more than just surviving. In the moments when they spoke, when they shared stories and laughs, Dorothy felt the weight of her past slowly lifting. She could feel herself coming back to life, bit by bit. It wasn't just physical healing anymore. It was emotional. It was alive. And as she sat there, her fingers still brushing against his, Dorothy realized something profound. Ethan didn't see her as a woman beyond her time. He saw her as someone full of potential, full of life. He didn't see an aging widow. He saw Dorothy, his Dorothy. For the first time in ages, Dorothy allowed herself to accept that truth. Ethan wasn't just treating her body, he was treating her heart. And that made all the difference. If you think it's never too late to start living again, comment below. We want to hear your story. At first, Dorothy had hoped that the tension between her and her children would pass. She thought they would eventually understand that her desire for change wasn't about rebelling, but about finally living her own life again. But the more she resisted their attempts to control her, the more forceful they became. It started with small things, a comment here, a suggestion there, but soon it escalated. Robert and Christine began showing up at her house unannounced, just to check on things. They'd start rearranging her schedule, questioning her, spending, even taking over small decisions, like what groceries she should buy or which bills she should pay first. It wasn't about concern anymore. It was control. One day, Christine arrived with a stack of paperwork, all for Dorothy to sign. "Just to make sure everything's in order, Mom," she said. Dorothy could sense the underlying message. They didn't think she could handle it on her own anymore. "Christine, I don't need your help with my finances," Dorothy said, her voice a little tighter than usual as she pushed the papers away. "Mom," Christine replied, her tone condescending, "you're not getting any younger. You need someone to look out for you." Dorothy felt a knot in her stomach. She wasn't getting any younger, but she wasn't a child either. She wasn't the same woman who had stood behind Charles for so many years. She had her own mind, her own will, and most importantly, her own right to make decisions for herself. The tipping point came one evening when Robert arrived, fuming. He had overheard a conversation between Christine and Martha, and it had pushed him over the edge. "Mom," Robert said, his voice sharp, "we need to talk. We've been trying to be patient with you, but this has gone too far. Ethan, he's too much. You're not a young woman anymore, and this is getting out of hand. You can't keep letting him into your life like this." Dorothy's heart raced. She had braced herself for this moment, but hearing it out loud made it feel real. Too real. Her son was standing there, demanding she give up something she had found, something that had brought her joy, something that made her feel alive again. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Robert?" Dorothy asked, her voice trembling, but strong. "Give up my happiness? Stop seeing someone who's helped me more than you could ever understand? You want me to go back to hiding, to being invisible again?" "No," Robert said, his voice softer now. "I just want you to stop hurting yourself. You're not getting any younger, Mom. This relationship with Ethan, it's not healthy," the words stung, cutting through her like ice. They didn't get it. They didn't understand that it wasn't just about Ethan. It was about her. About Dorothy. The woman she was, not the roles she had played. The woman who still had dreams, still had desires. She wasn't just a mother, a widow, a grandmother. She was a woman. A woman who had lived, loved, and lost. And now, finally, she was choosing to live again. The confrontation lingered in her mind long after Robert left. She sat alone, the silence of the house swallowing her up. She had been so torn. She loved her children, but they didn't seem to see her anymore. They saw their mother as someone they needed to protect, someone fragile who couldn't make her own choices. But she wasn't fragile, and she wasn't a child. That night, as the weight of the conversation pressed down on her, Dorothy made a decision. A decision she knew would be difficult, but one she had to make for herself. The next morning, she called. Robert and Christine, both of them still in shock from their earlier confrontation. She could hear the hesitation in their voices when they answered. "Mom, we need to talk," Robert said again, but this time his tone was softer, more cautious. "I know you think you're doing what's best for me," Dorothy said, her voice clear and unwavering. "But you're not. You're not seeing me for who I am anymore. I'm not some fragile woman who needs to be taken care of. I'm still me. I'm still Dorothy." There was silence on the other end of the phone. She could feel the shock settling in. "This is my life," Dorothy continued, "and I'm not going to let anyone, no matter how much I love them, take that away from me. I will not let you control my choices. I have the right to be happy, to feel alive, to make my own decisions. You may not like it, but that's the truth." Her children didn't respond immediately. She could feel their disapproval, but it was different now. It wasn't the same guilt that used to weigh her down. Now, there was only the quiet strength of someone who had finally claimed her own life back. "So you're saying you'll continue seeing Ethan?" Christine asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not asking for your permission," Dorothy said firmly. "I'm asking for your respect. I don't expect you to understand, but I need you to let me live my life." "Let me be who I am, not who you want me to be." The line went quiet. Dorothy could feel the tension stretching, but she didn't back down. "Mom," Robert said, his voice low, "I don't know if I can support this. But if this is what you truly want, then I guess I'll have to accept it." Christine stayed quiet, but Dorothy could feel the shift. It wasn't approval, but it was acceptance. And for the first time in years, Dorothy felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had made the decision for herself. No more hiding. No more pretending. She was Dorothy, alive, real, and free to live on her own terms. If you've ever had to fight for your own happiness against those who loved you, share your experience in the comments below. Something inside Dorothy had shifted. No longer was she hiding behind the expectations of others. No longer was she shrinking in the shadow of what her children or society thought she should be. She was living now, living for herself. And each day that feeling grew stronger. She'd made the decision to embrace her new life, and she wasn't looking back. Dorothy began to live on her own terms. She started going out more. Something as simple as a walk in the park, or treating herself to lunch at a cafe, became an act of reclaiming her space in the world. She no longer rushed through the days, waiting for them to end. She took her time now, savoring each moment, finding joy in the little things. Her relationship with Ethan had deepened too. What had started as a professional connection, a way to ease her physical pain, had transformed into something much more. Ethan wasn't just a physical therapist anymore. He had become her confidant, her friend, and, slowly, something more. They spent more time together, talking about their lives, sharing their hopes, dreams, and the parts of themselves they had kept hidden. Dorothy had never realized how much she'd missed the feeling of being seen, not as a mother, not as a widow, but as a woman. And with Ethan, she began to feel seen again. It wasn't just about physical attraction, though that was a part of it. It was the emotional intimacy they shared. Ethan made her feel alive in ways she hadn't felt in years. There was a tenderness in their moments together that she had long forgotten. Holding hands during their walks, sharing quiet laughter. and even the moments of vulnerability that made her feel human again. Ethan respected her independence, never rushing her, never pushing her boundaries, but she could feel the connection growing deeper with each passing day. Their relationship became a safe space, a place where Dorothy could finally be herself, without the weight of judgment, without the guilt that had followed her for so long. Dorothy was beginning to understand what it meant to live again, not just survive. The sciatica was a thing of the past, but more importantly, her soul felt lighter. Her body, once stiff and weary, now felt energized. She was moving through life with a renewed sense of confidence. She had taken control not just of her body, but of her future. One evening, as she stood in front of her mirror, adjusting a new dress she had bought for herself, a dress she never would have considered before, Dorothy smiled. For the first time in years, she didn't see the reflection of the woman who had been defined by loss or by the roles she had played for everyone else. She saw herself, the woman she had been, the woman she was now, and the woman she could still become. She had been so afraid for so long, afraid of what people might think, afraid to step outside the roles that others expected her to play. But now, she realized that there was no one else to live for but herself. "You look good," she whispered to herself with a small laugh, as if seeing herself for the first time through new eyes. Her life was no longer bound by the restrictions of what others thought. She was free to explore the possibilities. She wasn't just a woman with a past. She was a woman with a future. And it wasn't just about Ethan. It was about her. About choosing happiness. About creating a life filled with meaning and joy on her terms. Every decision she made now was for her, no one else. And with each choice, she felt more alive. Dorothy had taken back control of her life, not just emotionally, but physically. She had reclaimed her sense of self-worth. She had learned to trust herself again, and for the first time in a long time, she felt whole. With Ethan by her side, she knew the journey was only beginning. She didn't know what the future held, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready to face it, with all the strength, grace, and confidence she had inside her. She was Dorothy, and she was finally living. When was the last time you did something just for you? Share it in the comments. Things had slowly started to change. The tension between Dorothy and her children, which had been building for so long, was finally beginning to soften. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but Dorothy could feel the shift. They were beginning to see her, truly see her, not just as their mother, not just as a widow, but as a woman in her own right, with her own desires and needs. Christine was the first to reach out, her voice cautious but sincere when she called one afternoon. "Mom," she said, her tone quieter than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I've been thinking about how I've treated you. You're right. You deserve to live your life, and I've been trying to control things I had no right to. I'm sorry." Dorothy felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't expected an apology, but it felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders nonetheless. It was the first step, and it meant everything to her. And then, Robert. The man who had tried so hard to protect her, to shelter her from what he thought was an unhealthy relationship, had started to soften. He called one evening, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking," he began. "I've been hard on you, Mom. I didn't understand, but if this is what makes you happy, if this is what you want, then I'm willing to accept it. I just want you to be happy." For the first time in what felt like forever, Dorothy felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't going to get their full approval, and she didn't need it anymore, but their acceptance, especially after the struggle they had all gone through, felt like a new beginning. It was a sign that at last they were starting to see her as the person she truly was. And then, one evening, a moment came that sealed the change. Dorothy had invited her children to a family gathering at her house. Just a small dinner, nothing too fancy. Ethan was there, of course. He was always there now, by her side, in ways that felt natural, comfortable. She had stopped hiding their relationship, stopped making excuses. As the evening wore on, Robert and Christine exchanged wary glances, but they didn't say anything. There was an unspoken understanding that things were different now. They no longer needed to intervene. Dorothy was finally living her life, and she was doing it on her own terms. At one point, Dorothy and Ethan stepped outside onto the porch to catch a breath. The evening air was cool, the stars overhead twinkling like tiny diamonds. Ethan turned to her, his hand reaching for hers in that familiar, gentle way. Dorothy could feel her heart swell, not just from the love she had for him, but from the joy of having finally accepted herself. "You okay?" Ethan asked, his voice soft, as if sensing the emotion swirling within her. Dorothy smiled, her heart full. "I'm more than okay," she said, her voice steady but warm. "I'm finally exactly where I need to be." And as they stood there, hands clasped together, the world felt just a little brighter. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't pretending to be anything she wasn't. She was herself, a woman who had faced loss, struggled, and come out stronger on the other side. A woman who had fought for her happiness and won. Inside, as the night went on, Dorothy felt a sense of peace she had never known before. Her family might never fully understand her choices, but they had come to respect them. They had come to see her as the woman she had always been inside, and that was enough. At some point, Christine came up to her, her expression soft. "I think I understand now," she said, reaching out to take Dorothy's hand. "You deserve this. You deserve to be happy." Dorothy nodded, her heart swelling with love. It had been a long road, but now, finally, her family accepted her, not just for who she had been, but for who she was becoming. The evening ended with laughter, conversation, and a quiet sense of warmth. Dorothy was surrounded by her children, by Ethan, by the people who loved her, and in that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. She had no regrets. She had lived for others for so long. Now, she was living for herself, and she was finally free. If you've ever had to fight for your own happiness against those who loved you, share your experience in the comments below. Dorothy sat alone in her living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light on her face. The house felt different now, not just because it was filled with the sounds of laughter, of people who had come and gone, but because she was different. She had come so far since those early days of loneliness, when she felt like her life had already been written. Looking back on the journey, it was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short time. The woman who had once felt invisible, forgotten, had reclaimed her life, herself, in ways she never thought possible. She remembered the quiet mornings when the house was still and empty, and she would sit by the window, wondering if her best years were behind her. But now she knew the truth. It was never too late to change. It was never too late to find joy, to rediscover love, to live for yourself. She had found that love again, not in the way she expected, but in the form of Ethan, and more importantly, in herself. She had learned to take care of herself, to honor her own desires and needs, and to stop hiding behind the expectations of others. She had found strength in her independence, and beauty in her vulnerability. The road hadn't been easy. There were difficult conversations, painful confrontations, and moments of doubt. Her children hadn't understood at first, and she had wrestled with feelings of guilt. But with each step, she had grown more confident, more sure of herself. She wasn't defined by her age, her past, or anyone else's expectations. She was Dorothy, a woman who had lived, loved, and had the power to create her own future. And through it all, one thing had become crystal clear. Happiness wasn't something that just happened. It was something you had to choose, and Dorothy had made that choice. As she looked out the window, the sun setting on another beautiful day, she smiled to herself. She had finally learned the most important lesson of all: the power to change, to embrace life fully, was always within her. It wasn't just about finding love or healing old wounds. It was about living authentically. It was about reclaiming your voice, your joy, and your right to happiness. Dorothy had done that, and if she could do it, so could you. If you believe it's never too late to find love, happiness, and rediscover yourself, make sure you subscribe for more real-life stories. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Dorothy sat quietly in her living room, gazing out the window as the sun dipped below the horizon. It felt almost surreal to her, the transformation, the journey she had taken. She had come so far from the woman who once believed her best years were behind her. The quiet, lonely mornings had been replaced with moments of peace and purpose, each one a reminder that life wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. As she reflected on everything that had led her here, Dorothy realized just how much she had learned, not just about herself, but about what it truly meant to live. The woman who had spent years taking care of everyone else, putting her own needs on the back burner, had finally learned to put herself first. She had found the courage to stand up for her own happiness, to say yes to herself when everyone else was telling her no. Ethan had been the catalyst. Yes, but it was Dorothy's own strength, her own willingness to open her heart again, that had truly sparked the change. She had rediscovered the woman she had once been. Not just the wife, the mother, or the widow, but a woman with desires, dreams, and a future of her own. A woman who had learned that it was never too late to find joy, to find love, and to live the life she wanted to live. She had faced her fears, her doubts, and her family's disapproval, and in the end, she had chosen herself. She had chosen to embrace life, to embrace love, in whatever form it came, and in doing so, she had become the woman she was always meant to be. Looking back, Dorothy couldn't help but smile. The woman who once thought she was invisible, who thought life had passed her by, was now standing tall, empowered, vibrant, and ready for whatever came next. This wasn't just about finding someone else to love. This was about finding herself. About reclaiming her life, her power, and her happiness. And that was the greatest gift of all. Sometimes we think that life stops moving forward, that we've reached our limit. But the truth is, it's never too late to change, to rediscover who you are, and to start living your best life. Dorothy's story is proof that no matter how old you are, no matter where you've been, you have the power to rewrite your own story. If you believe it's never too late to find love, happiness, and rediscover yourself, make sure you subscribe for more real-life stories. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message.